From their very first car, the Dodge boys were on a track to set the automotive world on fire. Today, 90 years later, they're still torching the competition with everything from full boogie balloon four-cylinder engine to the mighty Hemi. Stay tuned for the story of Dodge, Chrysler's Go Fast division on the American Muscle Car. Anyone who knows anything about muscle cars knows about Dodge. A lot of the mystery and magic of Dodge may not have penetrated into the Blue Oval or the bow tie camps, but just about everyone, one time or another, has had his doors blown off by a big, bad Dodge. If it's happened to you, it's an experience you're not likely to forget. It's been an interesting century for Dodge. Well, almost a century. Dodge cars were first made in 1914, and from the get-go, they were made of some pretty tough stuff. In fact, their first nickname was those dependable Dodges. It's a name that stuck through the years. Until today, the name Dodge is synonymous with hard work, rough duty, and maximum performance. In fact, you might say Dodge was America's first extreme mobile.
Dodge has always been our performance organization, and it's grown with the company and it's changed with the company just like we have. And back in the muscle car days where horsepower and torque and cubic inches were everything, that's the same thing as it is today. We've rediscovered the love of high-performance automobiles.
The love of high-performance automobiles is putting it mildly. In Dodge's lifetime, they've consistently been at the tip of the high-performance spear.
Dodge has always been the performance division. Plymouth was the blue collar, the lesser expensive vehicle, and Chrysler was the top of the line, with the Imperial being right at the peak, and Dodge fit the niche of performance.
Today, Dodge continues to fly Mopar's Go Fast banner at every racetrack in the world. From its resurgence as a major power in NASCAR racing, everything from Nextel Cup competition to those wild and crazy pickup trucks, Dodge is back in the thick of circle track competition. On the drag strip, the Dodge Hemi has re-established itself as the boss. Everything from pro stock to the outlaw classes. And in world sports car competition, there's just nothing like the Dodge Viper anywhere.
Well, this car is an icon. It's a legend for the company, and it's got a following that includes thousands and thousands of people that both own Vipers and don't own Vipers. And we have clubs all over the world. We have Viper clubs in Japan, for Pete's sake.
The Viper is the most awe-inspiring production car in the United States today, bar none. Its performance is equal to esoteric European GT cars, costing 4 times as much. It also holds the distinction of being the only car in world sports car competition that has never been beaten.
This car literally redefined what our company was about. It made the industry and our competitors stand up and take notice that don't you even think about writing these guys off, because these guys get it.
Well, I think for Dodge it's the performance aspect of it, and that's really been the key for a long time. Clearly the majority of our products in Dodge have been high performance or higher performance. They are typically aspirational for individuals who want to hang out on the edge a little bit more. We have a tagline, grab life by the horns, and I think that really accurately depicts what's happened with Dodge over the years.
But all these high-performance fun and games had to start somewhere. When we come back, we'll meet the 2 no-nonsense Midwestern guys who got the show on wheels. On this American Muscle Car Special Report, Dodge, Chrysler's Go Fast division. 1914 was a great year to be in the automobile business. If you were a new car maker back then, you joined more than 50 other businessman engineers who all had, pardon the expression, a better idea. The original better idea guy was Henry Ford. His concept was to build cars on an assembly line. Along the way to becoming America's largest car builder, Ford had another bright idea. Word was out about 2 brothers from Niles, Michigan, John and Horace Dodge. The Dodge brothers had been involved in some sort of machinery almost since birth, and by 1900 had built everything from bicycles to steam boilers. In 1901, John and Horace had tooled up 2,000 engines for Oldsmobile, and Ford liked their work, so he did a deal with the brothers to supply all the engines for his new Ford automobile. Thanks to John and Horace Dodge's engineering brilliance, Henry Ford soon became America's largest car maker.
They looked at his drawings and his blueprints and decided they could do those things better for him, so they re-engineered much of his vehicle for him. They put it together and assembled it, and he was extremely happy with them.
Not only did they re-engineer a lot of his components, they also assembled and built his cars for him. He was so pleased with what they were able to do for him that he gave him 10% of his fledgling company.
In 10 years, John and Horace's 10% of Ford stock had grown in value to over $120 million, making the Dodge brothers two of the wealthiest industrialists in the United States. It also gave them the seed money to start their own car company. In 1914, tired of sharing their best stuff with Henry Ford, the Dodge Brothers Motor Company was born. Even by today's standards, it was an overnight success.
The Dodge brothers introduced their vehicles on November 14th, 1914, and they made 250 vehicles the first year. They're all considered 1915 models. In that first model year, they sold over 45,000 vehicles. Within 2 years, they were the third largest selling automaker in the United States.
In looks and layout, that first Dodge was pretty standard issue stuff for 1914. It was 156 inches long and 81 inches high, and was powered by a 212 cubic inch four-cylinder engine that made all of 35 horsepower. It didn't break any new ice stylistically, but people bought these new Dodges for their durability, not for their style.
Once their cars came out, everybody knew that they were going to be popular. As a matter of fact, before they even started building their car, 22,000 dealers tried to sign up to sell their vehicles before they even introduced one.
For the next 5 years, the Dodge brothers continued to build solid cars with an abundance of engineering. But in 1920, both John and Horace Dodge died of influenza, amazingly within 9 months of each other. In the financial battle for the company which followed, their heirs sold Dodge Brothers Motors to a New York investment firm, who promptly proceeded to mismanage the company to near financial ruin. In 1928, with most of Dodge's good reputation and all of its financial and business momentum nearly gone, a savior appeared. His name was Walter P. Chrysler. When we come back, Dodge becomes Chrysler Corporation's fun car on this American Muscle Car Special Report. Thanks to the marriage with Chrysler, Dodge was no longer a solo player. Now, instead of forging its own path, Dodge would have to fit into a product lineup which included everything from the ultra-luxurious Chrysler to the more moderate DeSoto to the dowdy little Plymouth. Dodge would have to seek its own identity among these other marques and generate enough profits for Chrysler Corporation to justify its existence.
When Walter Chrysler bought Dodge Brothers, the size of the Chrysler Corporation increased 5 times. So Chrysler really bought the company for its manufacturing facilities, its dealer network, and its good name and reputation.
They were one of the best-selling car lines in the country. They had a tremendous reputation for the ruggedness, durability of their vehicles, and adding Dodge to his corporation was adding another jewel to the crown.
Some of America's most incredible automobiles were built during the Roaring '20s. Chrysler Corporation, and the rest of the auto industry for that matter, had a great run during this decade. But it all came to a crashing halt as the Great Depression cut America's buying power to the bone. But even though times were hard, Dodge never lost sight of who they were and what they were all about. During the Depression, Dodge became the number 4 selling car in America, right behind Plymouth, but far ahead of Pontiac, Buick, and Oldsmobile. Just in time for America to enter World War II. Almost overnight, America's massive car-making infrastructure was converted to war production.
During the war years, Dodge switched exclusively to manufacturing military equipment. Of course, all the Dodge plants switched to building Dodge trucks. The light-duty trucks became the weapons carriers, the command cars, and the ambulances for the Army. Also, Dodge built the largest plant in the world up to that time outside Chicago, and under license of Pratt & Whitney, built the B-29 bomber engines.
After the war, there wasn't much consumer demand for B-29s, but Dodge's foot soldiers, the Power Wagons, became legends in their own time, laying the groundwork for a generation of ram-tough Dodge trucks to come. Meanwhile, the American car buyer, starved for new cars since 1942, was gobbling up anything and everything the car companies could throw down. For a while, all the car companies recycled their early 40s designs, but by 1949, Ford and GM were pushing the envelope of automobile styling with longer, lower, and wider car designs. Chrysler Corporation, however, was stuck in the high, wide, and handsome groove of the pre-war era. Despite their slipping market share, Chrysler continued to believe that lower and wider was a fad.
There was a transitional period at Chrysler that took place after the war. The management of Chrysler, in the form of K.T. Keller, was an extremely conservative engineer. And he did not like to change things because he believed that these things were faddish. Unfortunately, that conservative approach, both in terms of engineering and styling, put Dodge and Chrysler at a big disadvantage in the marketplace, especially after the war, when consumers wanted cars that were lower, longer, wider, faster, flashier. And this was just totally against what Keller wanted to do with the corporation.
This conservative mindset kept Dodge from breaking out of the pack until a change at the top brought into Chrysler Corporation one of America's most aggressive automotive stylists. When Virgil Exner joined Chrysler, the old slab-sided styling went out the window, replaced by an almost anything-goes philosophy. This design scheme became known as the forward look.
He was such a visionary that some people said that his cars were so futuristic that they probably would never pan out. But as we know today, a lot of his ideas worked out very, very well. True, they were ahead of their time, but that's what Dodge needed at the time.
All over Detroit, fins were sprouting on everything from cars to coffee pots. But thanks to the forward look, Chrysler, and especially Dodge, became the home of outrageous sheet metal. It
was all about marketing and attraction, and chrome. Everybody loves chrome.
Being a part of Chrysler Corporation and being part of Exner's forward look, yeah, they received their share of chrome and tail fins. But what was also great was that there was a lot of performance under the hood as well. So while it may have been awful shiny, it was awful fast as well.
Meanwhile, underneath all that outrageous sheet metal, wonderful things were happening. In 1953, Dodge had quietly introduced a new V8 engine designed for efficiency and extra power. They called it the Red Ram Hemi. They didn't know it at the time, but they had just let a genie out of the bottle that would rule American auto performance for the next 50 years. The post-war decade brought with it not just an appetite for new cars, but a passion for making cars go fast. Now that the war was over, people could turn their energy towards more enjoyable activities, like racing. Stay with us. We'll be back to trace the development of the most incredible engine ever made when this American muscle car special report, Dodge Chrysler's Go Fast division, continues. Chrysler's new engine for 1951, the V8 with the hemispherical combustion chamber, lifted them out of the low-performance rut they'd been in and put them solidly at the front of the high-performance pack.
So to give Dodge their own version of a hot Hemi and call it the D500 was a strong marketing move, and it allowed them to play in the performance market at an affordable price, and it attracted a lot of buyers.
Very soon, the Hemi became the cornerstone of a glittering new lineup of factory hot rods. Dodge's version of the muscle car, 50s style, was called the D500, and it was, by all measurements, a bona fide muscle machine. Now, for the first time, Dodge was transforming itself from a nice, dependable car into a road rocket.
For Dodge, 1953 was the pivotal year. Not only did the car get a little restyling, but it also received the Red Ram Hemi, and that changed everything for Dodge, and they never looked back after that.
By 1957, Dodge had discovered what a few other automakers had known for decades. Going fast was fun. So jazzed was Dodge about all this go-fast stuff that you could now opt for the Hemi in any Dodge model, which meant that even the bottom-of-the-line two-door Coronet coupes could hit the street with 340 horses of Hemi power.
Every Hemi engine, 58 or earlier, was dyno tested to make sure the horsepower was correct. Then the pan was pulled and the bearings were checked and it was put back together and then put in the car. Every engine.
But just as the Hemi was beginning to take over the streets and racetracks of America, the unthinkable happened. In an economy move, Chrysler Corporation discontinued this incredible engine in favor of a much easier to build wedge-head power plant.
In 1958, they had a new guy come in and he did a cost analysis and he determined that they could save $45 per engine by doing away with the Hemi and going to a wedge engine. And of course, it never worked out that way. In the end, they never saved a nickel.
But no amount of cost savings could put out the fire that the Hemi had lit inside Chrysler Corporation, and especially inside Dodge. Dodge was about to become Mopar's fast and furious division, even without the Hemi. In 1959, when Chrysler replaced the 392 Hemi with the 413 wedge, it was the first hint of good things to come. By 1961, this engine had migrated over to Dodge, with dual 4-barrel carburetors on a special Ram induction intake manifold, and a whole host of go-fast goodies inside. The 61 Dodge might not have looked much like a race car, but with the Super Ram induction D500 413 under its hood, it'd flat get her done. And to prove the point, a bunch of young Chrysler engineers showed up at the 1961 NHRA Summer Nationals with one of these cars and made history.
The Ram Chargers were all Chrysler engineers. That group of engineering people after 1960 decided, well, since we work at Chrysler, it might be advantageous if we built something that looked like what we sell. So they picked a 61 Dodge, and they created one super stock car.
The 61 car was built behind Dale Reeker's house, a rented house in Royal Oak.
Okay.
We worked on it out behind his house at night after we got off work.
At the time, Dyno Don Nicholson's 409 Chevrolet was the fastest stock eliminator car in the nation. But on this day, the Ram Chargers served notice that there was a new player at the table.
The announcer decided that he would have the world's first match race. And he asked the crowd how many people would like to see Dyno Don run the Ram Chargers. And everybody stayed. And the Ram Chargers beat him.
But they found that they got more advertisement on performance on Chrysler products in that one race that we ran that got shown in all the magazines. It got more coverage in the magazines than they could afford to buy advertisement. And it wasn't advertisement, but it was the story. Hey, the Mopars are here.
As 1962 rolled around, there was no going back for Dodge. After the Ram Chargers' win over Dyno Don, the dealer showrooms were overrun with stock eliminator wannabes, all ordering Dodges with America's new favorite race engine, the 413 Max Wedge.
The 413 Max Wedge, the name Max Wedge meant that they had taken the engine out to what they felt was the maximum. It had the dual quads on it on a cross ram. It had a real high lift, solid lifter cam in it. The engine came in two versions, 11-to-1 or 13.5-to-1. It was really a great piece of workmanship.
Over the next 3 years, America's drag strips exploded with Max Wedge power as Dodge and Plymouth drivers laid siege to the stock and super stock classes. Lightweight Mopars were everywhere, many times blowing all the Fords, Chevrolets, and Pontiacs away in the quarterfinals, ensuring that the last 2 rounds of competition would be all Mopar shows. By 1964, there were 2 kinds of stock class racers at the drags, Mopar drivers and the clinically depressed. But in stock car racing, this wasn't the case. The big player at this table for the past few years was Ford, and Chrysler Corporation was getting pretty tired of seeing the blue oval in the winner's circle.
This makes it 11 out of 12 wins for Ford in NASCAR events of 500 miles or more.
To set things right, the Mopar racers threw down the last trump card of the swinging 60s. Stay with us as the mighty Hemi comes roaring back, bigger and better than ever, as this American muscle car special report continues. Drag racing was fun, and it was all the buzz among younger gearheads in the mid-60s. But down south, hundreds of thousands of fans were showing up each week to watch good old boys trade paint on the high-banked ovals of Charlotte, Atlanta, and Daytona. This was the big show, with stars like Richard Petty, Fred Lorenzen, and Junior Johnson. Fans were over the top for stock car racing, with both excitement and loyalty to their favorite cars and drivers. This was all good, if you were a Ford fan, that is. Ford had been pumping large dollars into their worldwide racing programs and had taken virtual control over stock car racing. But in 1963, the Dodge boys said, this stuff stops here.
The president or CEO of the company at that time, Lynn Townsend's son, I think it was telling him that, you know, Chrysler products were nowhere, that all the kids wanted Fords and Chevys.
They didn't even necessarily know what the youth market was in 1961, but he knew that most of our buyers were getting older, and he wanted to get younger buyers, and he went to his people and said, how do we do this? And they said, well, we got to go racing.
Fortunately, within Chrysler's engineering department were some young guys who knew a lot about winning races. When the call came to make some more horsepower, it came to them.
So it was pretty secretive that the design of the Hemi started. Hoover was involved with it. Then we finally got the first engines built in '63, and it was aimed for the Daytona race, NASCAR Daytona race, in February of '64.
Under Tom Hoover's direction, the weight of Chrysler's engineering department was thrown behind the Hemi program, with the target of taking back stock car racing from the Blue Oval guys. It was a huge order. It was already April 1963, and Daytona was just 10 months away.
So in Daytona of '64, they rolled down with the Hemi. And Richard Petty won, obviously. To go from April with no castings to finished engines in February is absolutely phenomenal.
After Petty's win at the Daytona 500, the world knew that the Hemi was back. This one wasn't just a bored-out version of the earlier Hemi engines. It was a real race motor, from carbs to oil pan.
It was so strong, and so much was built into it. You got to remember, that Hemi engine was not built to win drag races. It was built for NASCAR. It was designed to build 425 horsepower at full throttle and go 500 miles like that.
By mid-year 1964, Dodge and its old stablemate Plymouth were firmly in charge on just about every racetrack in the country. The lead dogs in all this fun and games had been those Dodge racers, the Ram Chargers, and some other dedicated hot rodders in Chrysler engineering. During this period, these engineers came up with more high-performance hardware than any other car company on earth, dollar for dollar.
We talked about Chrysler and the amount of money that was available, which was not a lot, and Ford spent it by the truckload.
We never considered it a skunk works. We were just trying to get the job done, make fast cars that could win at whether it's in HRA or NASCAR racing.
Now that Dodge had taken care of job one, winning races, it was time for the stylists and the product planners to put a few cars in the showrooms that appealed to young people. They took a shot at pumping a little youth image into the nice-looking Dodge Coronet, which had been restyled for 1966. The Coronet RT was a great little car, but it hit about a 4 on the youth meter. What Dodge needed was a solid 10. Stay tuned as Dodge scores with a totally new design, the Charger, when this American muscle car special report, Dodge, Chrysler's Go Fast division, continues. It's generally agreed that the muscle car era in America started in 1964. Dodge purists, of course, will tell you that they beat this by 9 years with a real first muscle car, the 1955 Dodge D500. But everyone knows that Dodge really entered the youth market in 1966. And when they did, they jumped in head first with the Charger.
It was bam, it was in your face. If you wanted it to be, you optioned it with all the decalia, and they flat out just said, here I am, what do you have? On the other hand, if you wanted to delete some of those options and be a sleeper, so to speak, you deleted a lot of things. You left the high performance engine in, the right rear end ratio, 4-speed 833, or just however you wanted to option that car, and you could have a lot of fun on the street or the drag strip.
Dodge had a dual purpose in mind for the Charger. The first task, of course, was to attract some attention in the muscle car marketplace, which it immediately did. The second item on the Charger's agenda was to keep up the Mopar momentum on the NASCAR superspeedways. Ever since the Hemi had reappeared on the NASCAR tracks, it had been a game of go big or stay home for both Mopar and Ford. Battles had raged between the Hemi and Ford's all-world Wedgehead 427 for the past 2 years, amid cries of foul and boycotts by both camps, along with the most intense circle track racing anyone had ever seen.
Buddy Baker crashes into H.P. Bailey's spinning car, and that's the end of the line for this hard Charger.
The Hemi was the unquestioned horsepower king, and now for another leg up on the competition, Dodge decided to try Aerodynamics. The Charger was the first breath of fresh air for Dodge literally since the D500, and it was a breakaway from the driver's ed car styling of the Coronets and Polaris. First-year Charger sales topped 37,000 cars, and its fastback styling and personal luxury car interiors brought young people back into the showrooms in droves. But the thing that made muscle cars was muscle. Thanks to several years of high-performance R&D, the Charger had just about everyone else on the street totally covered in this department. Dodge's muscle engines ran the table from a very nice 4-barrel 383, which made 325 horsepower, to everyone's favorite torque engine, the 365 horsepower 440. But just in case you wanted to get nasty, the street version of Dodge's all-world race Hemi, featuring hydraulic lifters, 10.25 to 1 compression, and 2 Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors, was right there on the option list for a measly $1,800 more, or roughly 2/3 of the Charger's base price of $3,122. Dodge went around again in 1967 with the same basic Charger package. They added a few new chrome pieces and some new upholstery patterns, but they were still pretty satisfied with this car, which was basically a back half styling exercise sitting on the Coronet's chassis. But in 1967, the trend in the automotive youth market was away from big cars like the Charger and toward the new pony cars like the Camaro and the Firebird. Despite the first-generation Charger's shortcomings, though, it had done a perfect job of refocusing the youth market's vision on Dodge. No longer would young people look at a Dodge and say, that looks like the car my dad drives, unless he or she had a very cool dad. In the coming years, the Charger would take things to a whole new level, on the track and on the street. Stick around, we'll go there, when this American muscle car special report, Dodge, Chrysler's Go Fast division, continues. By the late 60s, Detroit was making cars that just a few years earlier would have been unthinkable. Inside Dodge showrooms, it was a toy box of fun cars. Thanks to all the racing R&D over the past several years, the fastest production cars in America were as close to your driveway as a friendly salesman and his order book. There were even some Dodge dealers who specialized in fun cars. Places like Mr. Norm's Grand Spalding Dodge in Chicago, Illinois.
We knew performance was already going to be our thing. That's when we signed up with Dodge and started doing performance.
Since 1962, Norm Kraus, or Mr. Norm, had been the go-to guy in the Midwest if you were a Mopar fanatic. He and everyone at Grand Spalding Dodge lived and breathed high-performance Dodges.
The whole dealership was keyed up to total performance. We ordered 50 of this at a time, 50 Ram Chargers, 13 to 1s, then the 12.5 to 1s, and then the 11 to 1s. We had them all coming into our place, and the only thing we ordered was performance cars.
Dodge kept the heat turned up by bringing out a newly restyled Charger for 1968. And this one would be everything the muscle car crowd was looking for. Abandoning fastback styling in favor of a tunnel-back rear window, this Charger looked like it was doing 120 just sitting still. Featuring long, smooth side styling with a Coke bottle curve, a deeply recessed grille, and a hint of a rear spoiler, this Charger oozed rich boy style, even before you got inside. The interior hit a new high for muscle car cool, with a redesigned dash with full gauges and every luxury option Dodge could dream of. Just in case you thought the new Charger was just a styling exercise, this new car had all the spine-tingling sensations that Dodge had been building into its supercars since the early 60s. You could get the Charger with a mundane little 318, but why would you? Starting with a very nice 335 horsepower 383, going all the way up to the monster 440 Magnum in the Charger RT, max wedge power was still king of the street. Except for the Hemi, of course. Still the baddest of the bad, the 426 Street Hemi, with 2 Carter 4-barrels, solid lifters, and 10.25 compression, delivered 425 rated horsepower. And that was just a starting point for tuners. By now, it was becoming difficult to find the line between street cars and race cars. Just about everything Dodge made was as comfortable on the racetrack as it was in the hamburger joint. To prove a point, and by the way, to further dominate superstock racing, Dodge tooled up about 100 lightweight 68 Darts with full race Hemi engines in them. This project, which involved the considerable talents of George Hurst, produced one of the scariest race cars ever made.
We did 50 Dodges and 50 Plymouths, and then we had 55 orders left over, and so we decided that we would finish building every one we had an order for, so it was 155.
With lightweight body panels, heavy-duty running gear, and all the tricks they could build into the car, the Hemi Dart was an off-the-shelf superstock eliminator. Meanwhile, here came Mr. Norm, roaring back with a street version of a bonsai Dart, featuring the 440 Magnum engine. Like we said, the line between race cars and street cars was getting awfully blurry. As the decade of the 60s drew to a close, the trend was toward more, bigger, and faster, and Dodge was driving that trend. When we come back, we're going back to the track on Dodge, Chrysler's Go Fast division, an American muscle car special report. Dodge had a little problem in 1968. While the new Charger was all anyone could want as a street muscle car, it wasn't working out on the NASCAR tracks. That nice-looking tunnel-back rear window and that sexy recessed grille were slowing the car down, and something had to be done. The 69 Chargers were already on the street, and except for a minor cosmetic change, they were clones of the wildly successful 68 models. But even though the cars were selling well, Dodge wasn't happy unless they were winning races. The answer was in aerodynamics. In the wind tunnel, Chrysler engineers discovered the places where they could make the Charger into a race winner. Early in 1969, a special edition Charger rolled out, featuring a flush grille and a flat rear window. Dodge called it the Charger 500. The Charger 500 was an extremely limited production model, and most of those went straight to the race teams. Of the 500 which were supposedly built, only a handful trickled onto the streets. But those that did came with a 440 Magnum engine as standard equipment, with a 426 Hemi as a $648 option. Most Charger fans got their only glimpse of the Charger 500 here at the track. By mid-year, though, it was apparent to the Dodge racers that, while improved, the Charger still didn't have a clear advantage over Ford's ringer, the Torino Talladega. So Dodge went completely off the deep end with their third version of the 69 Charger. And this one made everyone sit up and take notice. This is what it looks like when Dodge goes off the deep end. Since Ford copped the name of a famous racetrack for their rule-bending Torino, Dodge called this one the Daytona. The name was well suited to the car because in its first practice session around the 2.5-mile oval, it broke the 200-mile-per-hour barrier. Factory Dodge driver Dr. Don Tarr recalls how the Daytona handled on the high banks.
Unbelievable. There were no spoilers on the old cars. You were floating around the racetrack. You know, you had to be pretty careful about where you were going and when you were running flat out around Daytona and Talladega. But when the wing cars came out, you just pointed that nose anywhere you wanted to go. It was great to drive. It was unlike any other car that there was. I mean, with all due respect to the Ford Talladega Torino, which they also came out with that same year, these cars were handled just beautifully on the super speedways.
NASCAR required Dodge to create 500 Daytonas in order to certify the car for competition. So there were a few Daytonas available for die-hard Mopar lovers to buy. But that wasn't really the point. The Daytona was about winning races. And if they had to build a couple hundred street versions, well, fine. But again, Dodge had shown everyone that they'd do just about anything to win a race. Neither the Daytona or the Charger 500 were big favorites of the street crowd. By this time, the Garden Variety Charger and its lower-priced cousin, the Super Bee, were some of America's favorite muscle cars. So the limited production cars were a very rare sight at the cruiser hangouts. Far more popular with muscle car fans in 1970 was a brand new Dodge called the Challenger. After laying out for 6 years, Dodge finally hit the street with their own version of the pony car. And once again, it was a pull-out-all-the-stops effort. In the 6 years since the Mustang had invented the pony car, Dodge had observed much. When the Challenger debuted, it rolled off the assembly line with none of the built-in problems that plagued the Mustang and the Challenger's sister car from Plymouth, the Barracuda. Dodge made sure their biggest muscle power plants would fit perfectly inside the car's engine compartment. And they also made the car available with every luxury and hot rod option in their inventory. Challenger owners could custom tailor this car to be anything from an economy model to an awesome Hemi or 440 powered street machine to a bad boy little sports car. The Challenger was such a good sports car, in fact, that a special version featuring a very hot 340 cubic inch engine, side exit exhausts, and a host of other road racing suspension goodies became one of the most popular Challenger models. Called the Challenger TA, it was named after the very popular Trans Am road racing series in which it competed. As the swinging 60s drew to a close, the automotive radar screen in America was full of amazing cars. Muscle cars were driving the entire automobile industry, and there was no end in sight. At least that's what everyone thought. Stay with us as times get hard for Dodge and everyone else on this American Muscle Cars Special Report. Was the pinnacle of muscle car performance and also the end of an era. After more than a decade of anything goes muscle cars, forces around the world were conspiring to bring the most exciting decade in gearhead history to a close. As the Middle East oil embargo combined with skyrocketing insurance rates, driving a supercar like a Hemi Challenger or any muscle car became a very costly proposition. There was another dark cloud on the horizon. In 1971, new federal regulations mandated the elimination of leaded gasoline, which required lowering engine compression ratios. The inevitable result of this was the death of the mega horsepower engines, like the Hemi and the 440 Magnum. Under the weight of these forces and pressure from consumer groups who considered automobiles dangerous in any form, the future of the muscle car was measured in months, not years. After making America's most over-the-top cars for nearly 2 decades, car buyers' rush to more economical cars caught Dodge unprepared. By the mid-70s, Dodge's sales were in a free fall. From a high of nearly 600,000 units in 1973, sales dropped to 350,000 in 1975, and Chrysler Corporation was facing bankruptcy. In 1979, Lee Iacocca was named chairman of the board. His skills as a manager and a marketer would put the company on the road to recovery. As the corporation struggled to reinvent itself, the last of the rear-wheel drive Dodges was phased out in favor of mile-per-gallon performance, like the Dodge Omni. Under Iacocca, Chrysler Corporation fought its way back with a strong product mix of economical cars and the 80s version of the station wagon, the minivan. They might not have been muscle cars, but the K cars kept the doors open and the lights on until the paths of technology and the love of high-performance cars could cross again. This happened in 1992 with a project called Viper. Herb Helbig, the senior manager for vehicle synthesis for Daimler Chrysler's performance vehicle operations, remembers the day he joined Team Viper.
Yeah, I was the fourth guy that was taken onto the team by Roy Schoberg, who was the executive engineer at that point. And when he told me that I was going to be on the team, I literally couldn't sleep for 3 nights.
The Viper would be simply the most awesome American production car ever built. This 10-cylinder, 400-horsepower supercar was a pet project of Chrysler CEO Bob Lutz, who chose Dodge to bring the Viper to life.
Bob Lutz came to us and said, look, you got a couple of imperatives. It's got to be the most outrageous thing you ever thought about building in this company. And his commitment to me is, I'll keep the dogs away from you. Let you guys do your thing.
The Viper was conceived and brought to market in an unbelievably short time. When the Viper hit the streets, it was all Lutz demanded, and more. In fact, the car was so out front of the automotive world that even within Chrysler, there were people who needed convincing.
I got a chance to drive many of our senior execs at 150 miles an hour around the oval, top down, wind in their hair, engines screaming, just unbelievable. To a man, the guys that came into the car and said, you know, I'm not really with this project. I think it's a waste of our money. You know, financial times are tough. We're throwing our money away. To a man, when they get out of the car, they said things like, now I understand why we have to do this car.
The Viper signaled a total turnaround, not just for Dodge, but for the entire corporation. Today, the halo effect of this car extends to every product that bears the Dodge name. Sure evidence that Dodge is back in the muscle car business is the reappearance of an old friend, the Hemi engine.
Well, the new Hemi is a small block. It's less than 360 inch, but it's dual spark plug. It has aluminum cylinder heads and makes 345 horsepower, which is a pretty big number for today's modern emission controlled vehicles.
Even though it's smaller, today's Hemi is still everyone's favorite muscle motor.
Today's motors are so much more efficient than they were 15, 20 years ago that, I mean, you realize that the 440 cubic inch was rated at 375 horse, and that was our big performance motor in the old days. We're at 345 horsepower, with the small motor getting double, if not triple, the fuel economy.
The new 5.7-liter Hemi engine became the cornerstone of a new generation of Dodge Ram pickups, made for a new generation of truck owners.
The truck will go 150 miles an hour, runs a quarter mile in the 13s. Just an unbelievable piece, goes along right with the outrageous nature of PVO product. We walk the talk, simple as that.
Through the years, Dodge's objective of building spine-tingling fast cars hasn't changed. Only the methods have changed.
We're committed to making sure that vehicles that come out of PVO exceed the customer's expectations. So when they get done driving our car, they come away and they're just breathless. They go, holy mackerel, I can't believe they can build a car like this.
Funny, that sounds like the things muscle car fans used to say after a test drive in a Max Wedge Coronet or a Hemi Charger or a 340 Dart. Maybe things aren't so different these days after all. That's our report. Thanks for watching. See you again soon on the American Muscle Car. And please remember, don't crush them, restore them.